The tour bus leaves Kiev at 8 a.m. Inside, 23 tourists pass around waivers. Nobody reads them carefully. There's a man photographing his shoes, 2 women comparing camera settings, a teenager with headphones who hasn't looked up once. By noon, they'll be standing in a city that 50,000 people abandoned in 48 hours and never returned to. They'll eat lunch there. They'll take selfies. And most of them will leave with a radiation dose lower than a transatlantic flight. But some won't come home the same. Not because of the radiation, because of what they saw and what the tour guides are instructed not to explain. This is what actually happens when you visit Chernobyl. The Chernobyl exclusion zone is a 2,600 square kilometer ring of controlled land in northern Ukraine, drawn around the site of Reactor number 4 at the Chernobyl nuclear power plant. The zone has existed since April 28, 1986, 2 days after the explosion. Tourists have been allowed inside since 2011. In 2019, after the HBO miniseries aired, visitor numbers tripled. That year, over 124,000 people made the trip. The Ukrainian government actively promotes it. There are licensed tour operators, official checkpoints, dosimeter rentals, and a gift shop inside the reactor building itself. At the entrance checkpoint, a guard scans your passport. Another scans your bag. A third checks that your dosimeter is functioning. You sign a form acknowledging you understand the risks. Then the barrier lifts, and you drive in. The road is cracked. Birch trees press in from both sides, tall, close, pale as bone. In spring, the grass along the shoulders is vivid green, unusually green, the kind of green that doesn't ask questions about what it's growing in. Nobody tells you that the topsoil here was never removed, that it was considered too expensive, too vast, too politically complicated. That what looks like recovery is, in many places, just concealment. The landscape looks like it's healing. It isn't. The official tour follows a script.
You'll visit the cooling ponds where catfish, massive decades-old catfish, drift in the green water. Guides joke that they grew large because there are no fishermen. That's true. It's also incomplete.
You'll walk through the red forest, named for the color the pines turned in the days after the explosion, when they absorbed a lethal dose of radiation and died upright. The dead trees were bulldozed and buried. New pines grew. The new forest looks ordinary. The soil beneath it registers some of the highest contamination levels in the zone. You'll stand in Pripyat, the model Soviet city built to house plant workers and their families. The Ferris wheel is the photograph everyone takes. It was never officially used. It was scheduled to open May 1st, 1986. The explosion happened April 26th.
Your guide will tell you this. They're trained to. It's a good detail. It lands.
What they won't tell you is that independent radiation surveys of Pripyat, conducted by researchers outside the official tour program, have found hotspots, concentrated areas of soil contamination that are not marked, not roped off, and not mentioned. The official dosimeter reading for most of Pripyat is low. The average exposure during a standard tour is frequently cited as comparable to a chest X-ray. That figure is accurate for the paths. The paths are curated. In 2019, a group of researchers from the University of Exeter published a study tracking tourist movement through the zone using personal dosimeters. Their conclusion was precise and measured. Dose rates varied by up to a factor of 40 depending on where visitors stood, even within the same location. The official tour route kept visitors on the lower end of that range. Stepping off the path by a few meters sometimes didn't. Sometimes it did nothing at all. The problem isn't that the tours are dangerous. For most healthy adults on a single visit, they aren't. The problem is that visitors are given the impression they understand what they're walking through. They don't. Neither do the guides, in many cases. Guides are trained on the approved route, the approved talking points, the approved radiation data. Most of them are excellent at their jobs. What they can't tell you is what they don't know. Which areas have been surveyed recently, which haven't been surveyed at all, and whether the rain last week moved anything. Because radiation at Chernobyl doesn't stay put. Wind moves it, rain moves it, animals move it, wildfires. And there have been multiple significant wildfires in the zone, including a major one in 2020, release it back into the air. When the 2020 fire burned through the zone, radiation readings in parts of the forest spiked to level 16 times the normal background rate. Kiev, 100 kilometers south, saw a measurable increase in fine particle pollution. The tourists were gone by then. The fires usually start in dry season. The tours run year-round. Not everyone left. Roughly 200 people, mostly elderly women, returned to the exclusion zone after the evacuation and refused to leave again. They are called the Samosli, the self-settlers. The Ukrainian government eventually stopped trying to remove them. By the 1990s, there were several hundred. Today, fewer than 100 remain. They are in their 80s and 90s. They grow vegetables in the contaminated soil. They drink from wells that have never been officially cleared. Many of them have outlived the statistical models that predicted their deaths. This is one of the facts tour guides love to share. It's used to reassure visitors that the zone is safer than it sounds. What it actually illustrates is how little anyone predicted accurately about Chernobyl. The official Soviet death toll from the disaster was 31. The World Health Organization's long-term estimate is closer to 4,000 excess cancer deaths among the most exposed populations. Other researchers, using different methodologies and different definitions of exposed, put the number in the tens of thousands. 38 years on, there is no agreed number. There is only a range, a wide one. The self-settlers are real. Their resilience is real. What they prove about radiation safety is less certain than the tour script implies. Ukraine has a complicated relationship with Chernobyl tourism. Before the 2022 full-scale Russian invasion, it was a growing industry, one of the country's most distinctive tourism products. The Ukrainian government had invested in infrastructure, in visitor centers, in the new safe confinement. The massive steel arch built over the remains of Reactor number 4 at a cost of $1.5 billion, funded largely by international donors. Tours were a revenue stream. They were also a narrative. The message embedded in every sanctioned tour is a story of survival and transformation. A wasteland reclaimed, a disaster understood, a future possible. It is a hopeful story. Countries need hopeful stories. But the narrative requires a degree of control. It requires that visitors see the Ferris wheel and the swimming pool and the catfish, and not linger too long on the data they weren't given.
One former zone worker, interviewed by an independent journalist in 2018, put it plainly, "We show them the surface. The surface is fine. The surface was always fine."
The Russian military occupied parts of the exclusion zone in February 2022. Soldiers dug trenches in the Red Forest. They moved through the most contaminated soil in Europe without protective equipment. Several were subsequently treated for radiation exposure. The zone sustained infrastructure damage. The long-term environmental impact is still being assessed. Tours resumed in some areas in 2023. Most visitors leave the zone physically unchanged, but some carry something else out. In travel forums, a particular kind of post appears regularly. Visitors who describe the zone not as dark tourism ticked off a bucket list, but as something that recalibrated them. Not because of what they saw, but because of what they realized they weren't being told. The suspension of certainty. The gap between the official dosimeter reading and the uneven ground beneath their feet. One visitor described standing in an abandoned classroom in Pripyat, small chairs, a chalkboard still faintly chalked, and realizing that the feeling she had wasn't grief exactly. It was the particular discomfort of understanding that an entire generation of people had been told they were safe, and that the people telling them believed it. There is a version of Chernobyl tourism that is responsible, well-managed, and genuinely educational. There is also the version where a tourist touches a wall they were asked not to touch, pockets a piece of debris as a souvenir, which happens routinely, and carries a contaminated fragment home through international customs in a carry-on bag. This also happens. Routinely, the zone is porous in both directions. The tour bus returns to Kiev before dark. At the final checkpoint, everyone's clothes and shoes are scanned. If the reading is high, you shower and leave your clothes behind. This almost never happens. Most people pass through in under a minute. The guard waves them on. They drive back through the flat Ukrainian steppe, past sunflower fields, past small towns, past the lives that continued after 1986 in the villages just outside the boundary line. The zone ends at a fence, but the fence was always arbitrary. The contamination doesn't know where it is. If you want to understand what Chernobyl actually is, not the HBO version, not the tour script, the sources are in the description. Read them and tell me what you think about all of this.